Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Story Relaxing. Tonight we step onto the Western Trail just as the first snowfall quietly reaches an 1847 wagon train, where every breath turns white, every sound grows softer, and every small decision suddenly matters far more than you would like. It looks peaceful from a distance, almost like a holiday postcard before holiday postcards exist. But you probably will not survive this if you arrive with modern camping expectations and a suitcase full of confidence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and while you are here. Let me know where you're listening from, along with your local time. Now, dim the lights. You walk beside the slow-moving wagon as afternoon quietly slips toward evening. The road, if anyone feels generous enough to call it a road, is really a pair of muddy tracks pressed into the prairie by hundreds of wagons that passed before yours. The earth is hard beneath your boots. Dry grass brushes against your legs with a gentle whisper. Ahead, the white tops of covered wagons seem almost cheerful beneath the grey sky. Then you notice something drifting through the air. At first it is only one tiny snowflake. You blink. Another follows. Within minutes the sky is calmly releasing a steady curtain of white. Nobody panics immediately. People on the trail have learned that panic wastes precious energy. Still, conversations become shorter. Faces turn upward. Hands tighten around wagon handles. Even the oxen seem quieter, as though they understand the weather has changed the rules. You pull your coat closer. It helps for perhaps 3 seconds. The wind politely ignores your effort. Travelling west in 1847 means accepting surprises that would completely ruin a modern vacation review. There are no weather forecasts waiting on your phone. Nobody announces an incoming cold front. The clouds simply gather. And suddenly, your comfortable afternoon has become an uncomfortable lesson. One of the older teamsters glances toward the horizon. His beard already carries tiny white crystals. He says almost nothing, because experienced people often save words for moments when they matter. You wish he would say something reassuring anyway. Instead, he clicks softly at the oxen. They continue pulling. The wagon itself groans with every turn of the wheels. Wood rubs against wood with familiar complaints. Iron rims scrape over frozen stones. Ropes creak. Canvas shifts gently above your head. These sounds have become the soundtrack of daily life, almost comforting in their predictability. Snow changes that. The falling flakes begin swallowing distant noises. The prairie grows strangely peaceful. Even conversations seem wrapped inside thick blankets of silence. You inhale deeply. The air smells clean, cold, and faintly smoky from cooking fires still lingering from the previous noon stop. Somewhere nearby an animal gives a low grunt. Leather harnesses squeak. A child coughs inside one of the wagons before being quietly comforted by a parent. Life keeps moving, it simply moves more carefully. The great westward migrations of the 1840s carried thousands of emigrants across enormous distances toward Oregon and other destinations. Families, farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and dreamers all joined wagon companies hoping for new opportunities beyond the Mississippi River. Most expected hardship. Very few truly understood it. You certainly do not. The first snowfall has a way of introducing itself as a patient teacher. Nothing dramatic happens immediately. Nobody slides dramatically into a snowbank while dramatic music plays in the background. Instead, every ordinary task becomes slightly slower. Every pause becomes colder. Every mistake lasts longer. You reach down and brush snow from your sleeve. Another layer settles almost immediately. Nature, you realize, is very committed to this particular activity. Someone farther ahead laughs at a joke you cannot hear. The sound feels surprisingly welcome. Humour survives almost everything, especially on long journeys where tomorrow depends on everyone remaining hopeful enough to keep walking. One young boy sticks out his tongue to catch snowflakes. His mother notices. She smiles for exactly 1 second before reminding him to keep moving. Even small moments of wonder must compete with practical reality. Your fingers are already growing stiff. You rub your hands together. It helps a little. Not much. Historians still argue whether many emigrants expected early autumn snow quite as frequently as later diary accounts sometimes suggest. Personal journals often describe surprise, yet memories written years afterward occasionally emphasize dramatic weather, more than records written during the journey itself. Either way, nobody standing beside you appears excited about becoming part of that discussion. You look across the line of wagons. Each family carries nearly everything they own: barrels, crates, blankets, cooking pots, Bibles, seeds, tools, memories, dreams that somehow fit inside wooden boxes. There is something oddly moving about that. Every creaking wagon represents an entire future balanced upon wooden wheels. A little farther along the trail, one elderly traveller quietly removes his hat and watches the snow for several moments. Nobody interrupts him. Perhaps he's thinking about the home left behind. Perhaps he's wondering whether this journey was wise. Perhaps he simply enjoys the silence. Not every thought needs an audience. A curious trail story occasionally appears in frontier recollections, claiming that some travellers believed an unusually early snowfall could predict the character of the entire winter ahead. Whether this belief reflected old European folklore or simply hopeful guessing remains uncertain, but it gave anxious families something to discuss while staring at unfamiliar skies. Human beings have always enjoyed pretending the weather leaves secret clues if only we look closely enough. You continue walking beside the wagon. The canvas cover now carries a delicate white coating. It almost looks beautiful. Almost. Beauty has a habit of charging expensive admission fees on the frontier. The oxen breathe heavily. Warm clouds pour from their nostrils. Their massive shoulders keep pushing against the wooden yoke with patient determination. These animals rarely receive heroic speeches, yet without them the journey simply ends. You quietly begin appreciating oxen in a way your younger self never imagined possible. That sentence alone would probably confuse everyone back home. The trail stretches endlessly ahead, disappearing into the whitening distance. Behind you, the tracks slowly vanish beneath fresh snow. It feels as though the prairie is gently erasing every footprint almost as soon as it appears. That thought is strangely comforting. It is also slightly unsettling. You listen carefully. Snow lands softly upon canvas. Leather straps creak. Someone whispers a prayer. A kettle clinks inside a wagon, far away. A raven calls once before disappearing into the quiet afternoon. The world has become smaller, not because the prairie has shrunk, because visibility has. Your attention settles on the next step, then the next, then another. The cold asks you to live one careful moment at a time. Soon the wagon master raises an arm. The line gradually slows, heads lift, eyes scan the landscape. Everyone knows the same question has arrived without needing to ask it aloud. Where will you sleep tonight? The answer cannot wait much longer. Snow continues drifting downward with calm determination as the company begins searching the land ahead for a place that might offer even the smallest advantage before darkness finally settles across the western plains. The wagons slow until they almost stop. their wheels making one last reluctant crunch across the thin layer of snow. No one cheers at the chance to rest. After hours of walking, your legs would happily accept a break. But experience has already taught everyone here that choosing the wrong campsite can make an uncomfortable night become a miserable one. The wagon master studies the country ahead without saying much. Several other experienced travellers spread out across the nearby ground, each looking for something different. One watches the shape of the land, another searches for timber. Someone else checks the nearby stream, moving carefully so the icy bank does not send him into water that would be far colder than anyone wishes to imagine. You follow behind, careful not to slip on the damp grass now hidden beneath snow. Everything looks peaceful. That is exactly why you have to look closer. A gentle rise in the land may block some of the wind. A shallow hollow might collect freezing air during the night. Ground that appears firm could become thick mud after a few hours of melting. The prairie has countless little tricks, and it has been practicing them for much longer than people have been crossing it in wagons. The wind brushes against your face again. You immediately become a fan of hills. Not enormous mountains, those bring their own collection of unpleasant surprises. Just one respectable hill willing to interrupt an icy breeze. The scouting party eventually gathers near a stretch of open grass bordered by scattered cottonwood trees. The stream flows nearby without rushing too quickly. There is enough room for dozens of wagons, enough grass for the livestock, and enough wood that the evening meal might actually involve something warmer than hopeful thinking. The decision spreads through the train without shouting. One wagon turns, another follows. Soon the entire company slowly curves toward the chosen ground. Watching dozens of heavy wagons maneuver into place is almost like watching an enormous dance performed by people who would strongly deny they are dancing. Drivers call softly to the oxen. Chains rattle. Harness leather creaks. Children climb down, stretching legs that have spent too much time folded inside crowded wagons. The snow continues falling, never hurrying, never stopping. You help guide one wagon into position beside another. Nobody wants the wagon scattered randomly across the prairie. A loose arrangement leaves larger gaps for wind and makes it harder to keep track of both people and animals after dark. Popular imagination often pictures every wagon train forming a perfect defensive circle every single night. The reality was usually more practical. Many camps formed rough lines, horseshoes, or partial circles depending on the landscape, available space, and immediate concerns. Complete circles certainly happened, especially when conditions called for them. But they were far from universal. You look around as the wagons settle into a broad curved shape. It feels organized without appearing military. Families immediately begin familiar routines that have already become second nature. Someone unloads cooking pots, someone gathers kindling, someone checks harnesses, someone counts children. That last job is probably more challenging than counting pots. A little girl carefully carries a bundle of sticks almost as large as she is. Every few steps she loses one, walks back to collect it, then proudly continues forward. No adult rushes to finish the task for her, on the frontier. Children often contributed from remarkably young ages. The jobs were smaller, but they mattered. You kneel and press your hand against the ground. Cold. Very cold. It feels as though the earth has decided to borrow warmth from anyone touching it. You quickly stand again. The nearby stream deserves inspection before anyone begins filling buckets. Clear water looks inviting, but clear does not always mean safe. Mud, animal traffic, or upstream activity can change conditions quickly. Still, Fresh water remains essential for cooking, washing, and the livestock. You fill a bucket while thin pieces of ice drift lazily along the edge. The water bites your fingers so sharply that you almost laugh. Your hands disagree with this adventure as you carry the bucket back toward camp. Smoke begins rising from several small fires. At first the smoke hangs low beneath the grey sky before drifting sideways with the wind. Soon the familiar smell of burning cottonwood fills the air. It is not the finest firewood. It pops. It smokes. It occasionally seems determined to produce more smoke than heat. Tonight, nobody is in a position to complain. Historians continue debating exactly how much freedom individual families exercised when selecting nightly positions within larger wagon companies. Some journals describe fairly relaxed arrangements, while others suggest leaders assigned places more deliberately to maintain order, conditions, personalities, and company size likely influenced those choices from one journey to another. Nearby, one elderly traveller quietly examines the clouds once more. The snow may stop by morning, he says. Another man smiles, or it may not. That is frontier weather forecasting in its purest form. Nobody reaches into a pocket for a detailed hourly forecast. Nobody checks a colourful radar map. Instead, people read clouds, wind, experience, and hope. Hope, unfortunately, has never been especially reliable as a meteorologist. A curious belief sometimes appeared among emigrant groups that camping where buffalo had recently rested might offer slightly warmer ground because so many large animals had occupied the area. Whether anyone actually slept more comfortably because of this is impossible to prove, but the idea appears often enough in recollections to suggest it circulated widely around Western campfires. You glance across the prairie, half expecting to find a herd willing to leave behind heated seating. No such luck. The oxen receive attention next. Their yokes are removed with practiced movements. The animals lower their heavy heads, grateful for even a temporary release from the day's work. Steam rises gently from their broad backs. Bells tied to a few harnesses make soft metallic notes as they move toward patches of grass still visible beneath the snow, without healthy animals. The entire expedition stalls. Every family understands this. The livestock often eat before the people do. That fact says everything about priorities on the trail. Twilight slowly approaches. The sky becomes deeper shades of blue and silver. Snowflakes catch the last fading light before disappearing into the growing darkness. Fires brighten. Voices soften. Shadows stretch between wagons whose white canvas now glows faintly against the evening. You pull your coat tighter once again. The cold has become steadier. It no longer feels like a visitor. It feels like another member of the wagon train. Around you, the camp finally settles into its temporary shape. It is a tiny island of human determination, surrounded by an endless prairie, already disappearing beneath fresh snow. The wagons stand shoulder to shoulder, as though quietly agreeing to face the long night together. Soon every family must decide exactly where they will sleep inside this crowded little world, and those choices will matter far more than anyone would prefer to admit. The camp has found its shape, but the evening is far from finished. If anything, the most important work is only beginning. Darkness has a way of making simple choices feel surprisingly significant. One question quietly circles through every family. Where exactly are you going to sleep? It sounds simple enough. You have a wagon. Surely you sleep in the wagon. If only frontier life enjoyed being that straightforward. You stand beside the covered wagon and look inside. During the day it has been a moving storage room. Every inch is packed with objects that someone believed important enough to carry across half a continent. Flour barrels rest beside wooden chests. Cooking pots nest together with a satisfying clink whenever the wagon rolls over rough ground. Spare wagon parts sit beneath folded quilts. A spinning wheel peeks out from behind a crate. There's even a carefully wrapped mirror that everyone hopes survives another day without becoming 1,000 tiny pieces. Suddenly you understand the problem. There is not much room left for people. A covered wagon was never designed as a comfortable bedroom. It was built to move supplies. Sleeping inside often meant curling around belongings that refused to become any softer, simply because the sun had gone down. One family begins rearranging everything with practice speed. Boxes shift toward the front. Blankets come out. A small child is lifted into the wagon before falling asleep almost immediately against a pile of folded quilts. Children possess a remarkable ability to sleep almost anywhere. Adults spend considerably more time negotiating with reality. You climb carefully into the wagon yourself. The wooden floor feels hard beneath your knees. The canvas roof hangs low enough that you instinctively duck your head, even when there is no real danger of bumping it. The smell inside is impossible to mistake. Canvas, leather, dry wood, flour, animal grease, smoke clinging stubbornly to clothing. A faint trace of coffee lingering in a tin container. It is not unpleasant. It simply smells like survival. You stretch out experimentally. Your feet immediately find a crate. Your shoulder presses against a barrel. Your elbow discovers another object that appears to have been carved by someone with absolutely no concern for sleeping comfort. You quietly adjust your position, then adjust it again. Eventually you discover something almost comfortable. Almost. Outside, another family reaches a different conclusion. Rather than sleeping inside the wagon, they spread bedding beneath it. The wagon offers a little protection from falling snow and creates a surprisingly useful windbreak. It is hardly luxurious, but neither is pressing your ribs against wooden storage boxes all night. You crouch beside them. The ground already feels colder than it did an hour ago. Heat escapes downward with astonishing enthusiasm. Still, some travellers prefer the fresh air beneath the wagon to the cramped interior above. Choice, you discover, is relative. The largest families often have little choice at all. Parents, children, and infants simply cannot fit comfortably into one wagon packed with essential supplies. Older boys may sleep outside beneath extra blankets. Young men travelling together sometimes share bedding around a fire. Elderly relatives are often given the warmest available position, though every family balances comfort according to its own circumstances. Mainstream historical accounts consistently describe wagon trains as communities built upon cooperation. Families borrowed tools, exchanged food, shared medical knowledge, and helped repair broken equipment. Sleeping arrangements reflected that same spirit. A widow travelling alone might be invited into another family's wagon. An injured traveller could receive the warmest place available, even if it meant everyone else becoming a little more uncomfortable. You notice these quiet acts of generosity because nobody makes a performance of them. They simply happen. A young mother wraps another blanket around her sleeping daughter before tucking the edge beneath her tiny feet. The little girl never wakes. Her cheeks glow pink from the cold. One hand still clutches a rag doll that has probably travelled hundreds of miles already. You smile. Some companions never complain, no matter how rough the journey becomes. Nearby, two brothers argue in whispers over who occupies the better corner of the wagon. It is colder over there. It is not. It is. Their father looks at both of them. If either of you would like to sleep outside instead, I can arrange it. The discussion ends immediately. Amazing how quickly diplomacy flourishes under the right conditions. You step back outside and look across the camp. The wagons now resemble pale islands floating in darkness. Small fires flicker between them, casting orange light onto white canvas. Snowflakes drift through the glow before disappearing into shadow. Everything feels quieter, not silent. Quiet. Someone laughs softly. Someone coughs. A kettle lid rattles. An ox snorts somewhere beyond the wagons. Life continues in gentle layers of sound. Historians still debate how consistently emigrants followed unwritten customs about privacy within wagon camps. Some journals suggest remarkably open social habits born from necessity, while others describe families carefully protecting even the smallest sense of personal space. Much depended on personalities, weather, and how long the company had travelled together. You cannot help noticing how thin the boundary between public and private life really is. Canvas walls block snow. They do very little against conversation, if someone whispers. Nearby neighbours may hear only a murmur. If someone snores loudly, everyone hears the entire performance. Tonight. Many people are about to discover exactly who the champion snorer happens to be. A curious frontier tale occasionally appears in recollections, claiming that some travellers believed placing boots upside down near the bedding would keep spiders and insects from crawling inside overnight. Whether anyone actually tested this scientifically seems unlikely, but habits like these often survived because they provided reassurance during uncertain nights. You glance at your boots. It certainly cannot hurt. Then again, the spiders are probably having their own difficult evening in this weather. You remove your boots carefully. Your socks feel damp, not soaked, just damp enough to become annoying. You hold them briefly near the fire before putting them back on. Dry socks are wonderful. Slightly less damp socks are still an improvement. One older woman folds quilts with astonishing precision before spreading them in careful layers. Nothing is wasted. Every blanket has a purpose. Every fold traps a little more warmth. Watching her work feels like observing someone who has solved this puzzle many times before. Experience may not defeat winter. It certainly negotiates with it. A teenage boy quietly checks the wagon wheels before lying down. At first, the habit seems unnecessary. Then you remember. Tomorrow depends upon those wheels. Every evening inspection may prevent hours of repairs later. Even bedtime contains practical chores. The snow finally begins easing. Larger flakes drift lazily through the night air. Above them, tiny openings appear between clouds. One lonely star peeks through before disappearing again. It feels like a promise, or perhaps simply a reminder that the sky still exists beyond the weather. You settle onto your carefully arranged bedding at last. The wagon creaks softly as someone shifts nearby. Blankets rise around your shoulders. The wooden floor remains stubbornly firm beneath every layer. Comfort, you decide, has become a flexible concept. You close your eyes for a moment. Sleep does not arrive, not yet. There is still another challenge waiting for everyone tonight. The frozen ground beneath every blanket is quietly drawing away precious warmth. And before long, every traveller will learn just how difficult it is to stay warm while lying perfectly still. You settle onto your carefully arranged bedding, hoping the blankets beneath you will somehow convince the frozen earth to be a little kinder. They do not. The cold has been waiting here long before your wagon arrived, and it has no intention of giving up its place simply because you are tired. For a few moments you lie perfectly still. That turns out to be a mistake. The ground quietly steals warmth from your shoulders, your hips, and your feet. You shift to one side. It helps. Then your arm grows cold. You roll again. Now your back complains. Sleeping on the trail is less about finding the perfect position and more about rotating through a collection of slightly imperfect ones. Around you, everyone else seems to be conducting the very same experiment. A blanket rustles nearby. Someone sighs. Another traveller quietly turns over, making the wagon floor creak in protest. You begin to understand why experienced emigrants placed almost as much importance on what went beneath them as what covered them. The first layer is usually whatever can create a barrier between body and ground. Folded quilts are the obvious choice. Some families spread old buffalo robes first, the thick hide still carrying a faint, earthy scent despite months of travel. Others use spare clothing, empty grain sacks, or flattened bundles of straw gathered whenever suitable grass could be found. Nothing is wasted. If an object can trap even a little warmth, it earns its place beneath you. Trail journals from the late 1840s frequently mention buffalo robes as prized possessions, especially once colder weather arrived. A good robe served as mattress, blanket, winter coat, and emergency shelter all at once. Travellers who owned several considered themselves fortunate indeed. You run your hand across one lying beside you. The coarse hair feels surprisingly dense. It is heavier than you expected. It also smells unmistakably like the animal that once wore it. Luxury has a different definition out here. Across the camp, one family layers 3 quilts beneath their youngest children, while the adults make do with only one each. Nobody comments on the arrangement because it feels entirely natural. Children lose body heat quickly, and parents have always been remarkably creative when it comes to pretending they are less cold than they actually are. A father cheerfully announces that he hardly needs another blanket. His wife gives him a look suggesting she's heard this performance before. A few moments later, she quietly places an extra quilt over his legs anyway. He accepts without protest. Some victories are won without a single word. You pull your own blanket tighter around your shoulders. It carries the familiar smell of wood smoke gathered over countless evenings. Nearly every piece of cloth on the trail develops that scent eventually. Smoke settles into coats, scarves, hats, quilts, and hair until the entire wagon company seems wrapped inside one enormous invisible campfire. Oddly enough, it becomes comforting. Back home you might wash it away. Here it smells like warmth. The canvas above your head gives a gentle flutter as another breeze passes across the wagon. Tiny grains of snow slide down the outside with a soft whisper. The sound reminds you of dry sand slipping through careful fingers. You listen. The prairie has become astonishingly quiet. There are no passing carts, no distant factory whistles, no humming electricity, only wind, canvas, breathing, and the occasional low murmur from livestock beyond the wagons. The silence is never complete. It simply leaves room for smaller sounds to matter. One elderly woman removes a brick from beside the evening fire using a pair of iron tongs, wrapped carefully inside layers of cloth. The warm brick disappears beneath the blankets near her feet. Several nearby children watch with obvious admiration. It looks almost magical. A handful of emigrant recollections mention this practical trick during especially cold nights. Heated stones or bricks, wrapped securely to prevent burns, could provide welcome warmth for an hour or two before surrendering to the chill. Success depended entirely upon having suitable materials and enough fuel to spare. You briefly wonder whether someone invented the world's earliest portable heater without realizing it. The thought makes you smile. Not every clever solution arrives with polished metal and instruction manuals a little farther away. Another traveller chooses an entirely different approach, rather than lying flat. He curls tightly on his side beneath several blankets. He resembles a contented hedgehog. It may not be elegant, it does appear warmer. Modern researchers who study human sleep often note that curling slightly reduces exposed surface area, helping the body conserve heat. The pioneers reached that conclusion without laboratory experiments. Cold proved to be a persuasive teacher. Nearby, a young boy whispers to his older sister, "Do you think it will snow all night?" She considers the question seriously. "I hope not." "Why?" "Because I don't want to dig out my boots." That seems like perfectly reasonable logic. You glance toward your own boots resting beside the wagon wall. They already wear a thin white coating. Tomorrow morning promises its own little adventures. One curious piece of trail folklore suggested that placing cedar branches beneath bedding discouraged both dampness and troublesome insects. Whether the cedar truly made much difference remains uncertain, but the fresh scent certainly improved the sleeping area whenever branches could be found. Several travellers later remembered camps that smelled briefly of woodland rather than smoke and livestock. Unfortunately, cedar is not always waiting beside every prairie campsite. Tonight you make do with quilts. The temperature continues slipping lower. You notice it not because anyone announces the change, but because conversations gradually fade. People stop adjusting equipment and begin conserving movement. Hands disappear beneath blankets. Hats are pulled lower over ears. Even laughter becomes quieter. Energy is precious. Warmth is even more precious. The oxen stand together beyond the wagons, their broad shapes barely visible in the darkness. From time to time one shifts its weight, producing the gentle clink of a loose chain. Another exhales a slow cloud that catches the firelight before vanishing into the night. Those familiar sounds become unexpectedly reassuring. As long as the animals remain calm, the camp itself feels settled. You close your eyes once more. This time your breathing begins matching the slow rhythm surrounding you. In, out, in, out. The blankets gradually warm from your own body heat. Not dramatically, just enough that the sharp edge of the cold begins to soften. For the first time since lying down, you think real sleep might finally arrive. Then, somewhere beyond the nearest wagons, a bell gives a single quiet ring. Another answers. The livestock are moving, not running, simply moving enough to remind the camp that even during the darkest hours, someone will have to keep watch over the animals, the weather, and the fragile little community resting beneath the snowy sky. Sleep, it seems, must wait just a little longer. The quiet bell fades into the snowy darkness, and for a little while nobody speaks. The movement among the livestock settles again, leaving only the steady crackle of nearby fires. Your thoughts drift towards sleep, but another smell gently interrupts them. Supper. It arrives long before the food itself. Wood smoke slips through the cold air, carrying hints of boiling coffee, roasting salt pork, and fresh bread if a family has enough flour and enough patience to make it. Even before you see the cooking pots, your stomach reminds you that walking beside a wagon all day burns far more energy than sitting comfortably behind a modern desk. You carefully climb out from your bedding. The cold greets you immediately, as though it has been waiting outside just to say hello. Your boots are stiff. Your fingers complain while tying the laces. Even simple tasks seem determined to take twice as long. Small cooking fires dot the camp like warm stars scattered across the snow. Families gather close, careful not to waste precious heat. Nobody builds enormous bonfires unless there is an unusual abundance of fuel. Firewood must be collected, carried, chopped, and protected from moisture. Every log represents work. You kneel beside one of the fires. The flames dance eagerly around thin cottonwood branches before reaching thicker pieces placed across glowing coals. Cottonwood burns well enough to keep people alive, but few travellers would have described it as perfect firewood. It burns quickly and often produces more sparks than anyone wants landing on a canvas wagon cover. That means someone is always watching. A kettle hangs above the flames from a simple iron hook. Steam curls upward in slow white ribbons before disappearing into the evening air. The bubbling water sounds almost cheerful. Someone lifts the lid. The aroma grows stronger. Coffee. Real coffee. Not everyone enjoys the luxury every evening, but for those who do, the smell alone feels comforting enough to lift tired spirits. Many emigrant diaries mention coffee with surprising affection. Even when supplies became limited, people often tried to save enough beans for especially difficult days. A warm cup offered more than caffeine. It restored routine, encouraged conversation, and reminded travellers of kitchens left thousands of miles behind. A woman carefully stirs a pot of stew. You lean forward just enough to glimpse its contents: salt pork, beans, a few onions, some dried herbs added weeks ago. Nothing fancy, everything useful. It looks exactly like the kind of meal your body's been hoping for. Nearby, another family prepares something even simpler. Hard biscuits soften in hot broth until they can be eaten without testing the strength of every tooth. A young boy pokes one with a spoon, watching it slowly sink beneath the surface. He looks fascinated. His older sister looks hungry. There is a difference. You accept a tin plate when it is offered. The metal feels almost painfully cold until the steaming stew touches it. Heat spreads through your hands with welcome determination. You take the first careful bite. It is hot enough to demand patience. It is also delicious. Not because the ingredients are extraordinary, because you have spent an entire day earning every spoonful. The beans are soft. The pork is salty. The broth carries a smoky richness from hours over the fire. You cannot remember the last time such ordinary food tasted so satisfying. Across the fire. Conversation slowly returns. Nobody talks loudly. Long days encourage quieter voices. One man tells a story about a stubborn mule that once refused to cross a shallow creek for nearly an hour, only to leap across it effortlessly after everyone stopped watching. Several people laugh. Someone claims the mule merely wanted an audience. That explanation seems as reasonable as any other. You notice how stories travel around the fire almost as naturally as bowls of food. They fill empty spaces while supper cooks. They make waiting feel shorter. One little girl asks whether snow tastes different from rain. Her grandmother pretends to consider the question very seriously. I believe it tastes quieter. The child nods. That answer somehow satisfies everyone. One lesser-known custom described in several trail recollections involved saving the last scraps from supper for the camp dogs whenever possible. These hard-working animals guarded supplies, warned of approaching strangers or wandering animals, and often accompanied hunting parties. They earn their meals as surely as any member of the company. Sure enough. 2 patient dogs now wait near the edge of the firelight. Neither begs loudly. Both watch every spoon with remarkable concentration. Eventually each receives a small reward. Their tails express heartfelt gratitude. The snowfall continues, although more gently now. Tiny flakes drift through rising smoke, briefly glowing orange before vanishing into darkness. It is strangely beautiful, the kind of beauty that asks nothing from you except quiet attention. Researchers examining trail journals have reached differing conclusions about how varied emigrant diets really were. Some accounts describe surprisingly creative meals whenever hunting proved successful, or wild plants could be gathered safely. Others suggest long stretches of repetitive eating, especially later in the journey when supplies grew limited. The reality almost certainly depended on weather, location, and simple good fortune. Tonight fortune has at least provided warm food. You notice one elderly man carefully wiping every last drop of broth from his bowl with a piece of bread. Nothing is wasted, not because people enjoy strict discipline, because every pound of flour loaded into a wagon months ago represented careful planning. Every meal affects tomorrow. One family quietly measures flour before putting the sack away. Another checks the remaining coffee beans. A third counts strips of dried meat. Nobody performs these little calculations dramatically. They have become habits. Habits keep wagon trains moving. A young mother blows gently across a spoonful of stew before handing it to her toddler. The child opens wide, accepts the bite, then immediately points toward the pot asking for another. Some forms of communication require no translation. The fire settles lower. Fresh wood is added with care. Too much at once wastes fuel. Too little leaves everyone shivering. Keeping a frontier fire alive is almost like holding a conversation. It asks for constant attention but rewards patience. You stretch your hands toward the flames. Warmth reaches your fingers first, then your palms, then, little by little, the stiffness begins to disappear. For a brief moment you feel completely comfortable. It is a rare gift. You appreciate it while it lasts. Someone begins humming a familiar hymn so softly that it almost blends with the crackling fire. No one joins immediately. Then another quiet voice adds the melody. Soon several people are humming together, not as a performance, but as companions sharing the same long road. The music drifts across the camp. The oxen lift their heads briefly. A horse stamps one hoof. The snow keeps falling. Everything else grows still. Your bowl is empty now. The last warmth fades from the tin plate almost as quickly as it arrived. You wipe it clean before handing it back. Tomorrow it will be used again, and the day after that. Simple objects rarely rest on the trail. As the fires burn lower and supper comes to its peaceful end, attention slowly shifts away from food and toward the animals waiting beyond the edge of the camp. They have carried the journey through another difficult day, and before anyone can think seriously about sleep, they too must be fed, checked, and protected against the long winter night that is quietly settling over the prairie. Your empty bowl is returned to the wagon. The last glowing coals are nudged into a safer shape, and almost without anyone giving an order, the attention of the entire camp shifts toward the animals. People may be hungry. People may be exhausted. The oxen come first. That simple rule keeps the journey alive. You pull on your gloves again, already noticing that they have not completely dried since the afternoon. They are warmer than bare hands, which is enough to earn your gratitude. Beyond the ring of wagons, the livestock stand quietly against the pale landscape. Their dark shapes seem almost carved from the evening itself. Snow rests across broad backs, yet many of the animals hardly acknowledge it. Thick winter coats have begun growing over the past weeks, giving them better protection than the travellers wrapped in quilts and heavy coats. You approach one of the oxen carefully. It raises its massive head and studies you with calm brown eyes. There is nothing dramatic in that look. No grand friendship, no cinematic moment where lifelong trust is instantly established. The ox simply appears curious whether you intend to bring food. That feels perfectly fair. A driver loosens the rope, securing several animals together before leading them toward a patch of prairie grass where the snow remains thin enough for grazing. The grass is dry and far from lush, but it is still valuable. Every mouthful means less feed taken from the wagons. Many overland diaries note that oxen were generally favoured over horses for the longest emigrant journeys. They moved more slowly, certainly, but they tolerated hardship remarkably well, survived on rough grazing, and recovered from difficult travel with surprising resilience. Speed mattered far less than endurance. Looking at these steady creatures now, you begin to understand why. One enormous ox lowers its head and pushes aside fresh snow with its nose, back and forth, back and forth. Soon a patch of yellow grass appears. Dinner has been located. Nature rarely provides convenience. It does occasionally reward persistence. Nearby, several horses receive extra attention. Unlike the oxen, they often require grain if supplies allow. Horses are faster and more spirited, but they generally demand better care. Their owners brush melting snow from their coats with slow, deliberate strokes. The horses seem grateful, or perhaps merely tolerant. Animals have a remarkable talent for keeping their opinions private. A young mule decides this peaceful atmosphere has lasted quite long enough. It gives a loud bray that echoes across the snowy prairie. Every nearby traveller looks up. The mule appears extremely pleased with itself. Someone chuckles. There he goes, announcing supper to the whole territory. The mule offers no apology. It has contributed exactly what it intended. You continue helping scatter hay from a tightly packed bale carried inside one of the supply wagons. The sweet dry smell rises immediately, surprisingly pleasant after hours of smoke and damp air. The animals gather with quiet determination. No pushing, very little fuss, just steady chewing. The sound fills the darkness with a strange rhythm. Crunch, pause, crunch again. It is oddly soothing. Several bells hanging from leather collars produce soft musical notes whenever an animal shifts position. The sounds drift lazily across the camp, never loud enough to disturb anyone, yet constant enough to remind you where the herd has wandered. Those little bells may seem decorative. They are anything but. During darkness, fog, or snowfall, hearing often becomes more reliable than sight. A traveller standing beside you tilts his head. They are staying together. He sounds relieved. So are you. A number of surviving journals describe the nightly challenge of keeping livestock from wandering too far after sunset. Some companies assigned dedicated herders. Others relied on picket ropes, bells, natural barriers, or combinations of all three. The approach often depended on weather, available grass, and the size of the wagon company. Tonight the snowfall adds another complication. Fresh tracks disappear surprisingly quickly. You kneel for a closer look at the ground. The prints left only minutes ago already appear softer around the edges. Another hour may erase them almost entirely. One old trail belief suggested that particularly restless cattle sensed approaching storms before people noticed changes in the sky. Whether this reflected genuine animal behaviour or simple coincidence remains impossible to determine. Yet more than a few emigrants claim they trusted the herd's mood almost as much as the clouds overhead. You glance toward the cattle. They seem perfectly content. Perhaps they are predicting a peaceful night, or perhaps they are simply enjoying dinner. One of those explanations is probably more reliable than the other. A teenage boy walks slowly around the outer edge of the grazing animals, carrying a lantern shielded from the wind. Its warm glow creates moving circles of golden light across the snow. You follow him for a short distance. Neither of you speaks. There is no need. The quiet itself feels companionable. From somewhere beyond the grazing herd comes the sharp yip of a coyote. Another answers farther away. The sound freezes everyone for just a moment. Not from terror, from attention. The oxen continue eating. The horses lift their heads briefly before relaxing again. The coyotes are almost certainly more interested in rabbits than wagons full of determined emigrants. Even so, every unfamiliar sound deserves notice. Academic opinion remains divided over how frequently predators posed serious threats to wagon train livestock. Contemporary accounts range from calm observations of distant howling to dramatic reports of attempted attacks. Local conditions almost certainly shaped those experiences far more than any single general rule. The camp dogs hear the coyotes as well. Both lift their ears. One gives a low warning growl. The other simply watches the darkness with complete concentration. You suddenly appreciate having them nearby. The snow has nearly stopped now. Only an occasional flake drifts down through the still air. Clouds begin breaking apart overhead. Little by little, stars emerge. At first, there are only a handful, then dozens, then what feels like thousands, without city lights. The night sky seems almost impossibly crowded. You find yourself staring upward far longer than intended. The stars appear bright enough to touch. One elderly traveller notices your expression. "Good night for tomorrow's weather," he murmurs. Perhaps he's right. Perhaps he simply enjoys hopeful predictions before bedtime. Hope travels surprisingly well. The animals finish eating gradually. Some lie down, others remain standing, slowly chewing their cud. Steam rises gently from warm bodies into the crisp air before dissolving beneath the growing field of stars. You walk among them one last time, checking ropes, harnesses, and simple knots. Every buckle matters. Every loose strap deserves attention. A small problem discovered tonight may prevent a much larger problem after sunrise. No one rushes. Carelessness rarely saves time. Satisfied at last. The herders return toward the wagons. Boots leave fresh prints across the whitening ground. Behind them the livestock settle into a peaceful silence, broken only by an occasional bell or contented snort. The camp feels different now, more complete. The people have eaten, the animals have eaten, the fires burn steadily. Darkness has fully claimed the prairie, yet one challenge still refuses to disappear. Your gloves remain damp, your coat carries melted snow, your boots feel colder than they did an hour ago. No matter how carefully you tended the livestock, you cannot escape the uncomfortable truth that tomorrow's warmth depends greatly upon clothing that still has not managed to dry. You leave the quiet herd behind and return toward the wagons, where the fires have settled into glowing beds of red and orange. The camp feels smaller now. Earlier it was filled with movement, voices, cooking, and chores. Now every step is slower. Every conversation is softer. The long day has finally begun asking for its payment. Your coat certainly agrees. You stop beside one of the fires and hold out your sleeves. Wisps of steam rise almost immediately from the damp wool. They curl into the cold night before disappearing completely. It is encouraging. Unfortunate. Encouragement is not the same thing as dry clothing. The snow that landed so gently during the afternoon has quietly worked its way into collars, cuffs, gloves, socks, and hats. Walking all day generated enough body heat to hide the discomfort. Standing still is another matter entirely. The cold discovers every damp thread. You remove one glove and flex your fingers. The skin feels tight from the dry air. Your fingertips are slightly numb, although the warmth of the fire begins coaxing life back into them. Tiny tingles spread across your hands, not exactly pleasant, better than remaining numb. Around the nearest fire, several travellers are doing exactly what you are. Gloves rest on sticks driven into the ground. Socks hang from wagon wheels. Scarves are draped over ropes stretched between wooden bows supporting the canvas cover. The entire camp resembles an unusually practical laundry. One young man proudly announces that his socks are finally dry. He picks them up. They immediately fall into the snow. Nobody says a word. Then someone quietly hands him a clean stick. Even he laughs. Out here, dignity occasionally takes an unscheduled holiday. Most people own surprisingly few changes of clothing during the overland journey. Every extra shirt, dress, or pair of trousers occupied valuable wagon space that might otherwise carry food, tools, or spare parts. As a result, garments were worn repeatedly, repaired whenever possible, and treated as important possessions rather than disposable items. You glance at the patches sewn across one traveller's coat. Different shades of cloth tell their own little history. One tear repaired months ago, another patched only last week, a sleeve carefully reinforced before it could wear through completely. The stitches may not be fashionable, they're remarkably honest. An older woman sits on a folding stool with a small sewing basket balanced on her lap. Even in the firelight, her hands move confidently, needle, thread, pull, trim. She barely needs to look. Years of practice have taught her fingers almost everything. Beside her rests a pile of clothing waiting its turn. A child's mitten, a man's shirt, a wool stocking with a heel that has nearly surrendered. By morning, every piece will probably be ready for another day's work. Nothing leaves the trail simply because it has become worn. It earns another repair first. You lean closer to the fire, careful not to scorch the edge of your coat. Wool has one enormous advantage over many other fabrics. Even when damp, it continues trapping a surprising amount of warmth. It is heavier than linen and far itchier than anyone would prefer. But cold weather has a habit of making peace with scratchy clothing. A traveller nearby scratches his neck anyway. Perhaps there are limits to every friendship. Linen shirts peek out beneath thick wool coats all around the camp. Several women wear long wool skirts protected by sturdy aprons. Broad-brimmed hats now rest inside the wagons, replaced by knitted caps and scarves wrapped tightly around ears and necks. Footwear varies from sturdy leather boots to heavy shoes fitted with thick wool stockings. None of them are completely waterproof. Everyone wishes they were. Letters written by emigrants often mention the endless struggle to keep clothing serviceable. Rain, river crossings, dust, mud, and snow all demanded constant repairs. Many families carried needles, extra thread, patches, and spare buttons with nearly as much care as they carried cooking utensils. A missing button could become a surprisingly important problem once cold winds arrived. You hold your boot toward the fire, not too close. Leather dries best with patience. Too much heat can cause it to stiffen and crack. Experience has taught many travellers this lesson the unpleasant way. One father notices his teenage son edging a boot dangerously near the flames. Back a little, the boy obeys. "You'll cook it before you dry it." That sentence would sound very strange anywhere except a frontier campsite. Nearby, a woman gently shakes out a blanket before folding it again. Tiny ice crystals scatter into the firelight like glitter. For a brief second they sparkle beautifully. Then they vanish. The sight reminds you how quickly moisture changes its shape during a freezing evening. One curious habit recorded in a handful of family recollections involved sleeping with the next day's clothes tucked beneath the blankets. The goal was not to dry them completely. That would have required a small miracle. Instead, people hoped the garments would remain warmer than if left hanging in the open air. Making the morning a little less unpleasant, you immediately decide that whoever first suggested this idea deserved sincere appreciation. Pulling on freezing clothes at sunrise sounds like an experience best avoided. Not everyone succeeds in drying their garments tonight. A pair of stockings still feels damp. A scarf remains cool to the touch. One little boy's mittens are hopelessly wet after an enthusiastic afternoon of examining every handful of fresh snow. His mother smiles while placing them closer to the fire. I told you. He studies the mittens with complete seriousness. I thought they would dry while I was wearing them. An interesting theory. Nature respectfully declines to cooperate. You notice another detail as the evening continues. The smoke from every fire has settled into nearly every piece of clothing in camp. Coats, blankets, hats, even gloves. The smell follows everyone wherever they go. Oddly enough, nobody seems bothered. Perhaps because the scent has become connected with warmth, companionship, and another successful day on the trail. Certain smells become memories long before anyone realizes it. The breeze shifts slightly. Instead of biting through your coat, it now brushes against fabric that has grown a little drier, a little lighter, and considerably more comfortable. Not perfect. Perfect is rarely available on the frontier. Good enough often proves more valuable. The stars overhead shine with growing clarity now that the clouds have almost completely departed. Frost begins forming along the edges of wagon wheels. Tiny white crystals decorate ropes and harnesses, transforming ordinary equipment into delicate works of winter art. You reach out and touch one. The frost disappears instantly beneath your fingertip. Small reminders of warmth still belong to you. The camp has nearly settled for the night. Clothing has been folded, boots lined neatly beside bedding, coats brushed free of loose snow, and scarves wrapped around weary shoulders once again. Everyone has done as much as possible. The rest depends upon the hours ahead. Soon families will disappear beneath the canvas covers, drawing blankets close around children, parents, and treasured belongings. Within those cramped spaces, the long winter night will test not only the warmth of quilts and coats, but also the patience, kindness, and quiet endurance of people learning to live together inside little wooden worlds on wheels. One by one, the fires settle into glowing circles of embers, and families disappear beneath the pale canvas covers that have become temporary homes. From outside, every wagon looks almost identical. White canvas, wooden wheels, snow resting gently along the curved roof. Inside, however, each wagon tells a different story. You lift the canvas flap and climb carefully into yours once more. The familiar scent greets you before your eyes adjust to the dim light of a small lantern. Wood, wool, leather, smoke, a trace of dried apples tucked away in a small sack. It smells crowded, lived in, and strangely comforting. The lantern flame dances whenever someone shifts their weight, throwing gentle shadows across stacked boxes and hanging coats. Nothing remains perfectly still for very long, even while parked. The wagon seems to breathe. The wooden frame settles with tiny creaks. Canvas whispers against the boughs overhead. Someone nearby adjusts a blanket. The entire little space feels alive. You lower yourself onto the bedding with considerably more care than you did earlier. After a full day of climbing in and out, you've already learned where every sharp corner hides. The flour barrel still insists on occupying too much room. The tool chest remains as unforgiving as ever. Neither intends to apologize. Across from you, a young mother cradles a sleeping infant against her shoulder. She moves with remarkable patience, rocking almost imperceptibly. The baby's breathing remains slow and even, interrupted only by the occasional sleepy sigh. The mother smiles without saying anything. She has won a small victory. Keeping a baby asleep inside a crowded wagon is no minor achievement. Beside her, another child curls beneath two quilts while clutching a rag doll whose stitched face has faded almost beyond recognition. One button eye points slightly upward, giving the doll a permanently surprised expression. It has probably witnessed every mile of the journey. You wonder how many conversations that little doll has quietly overheard. Many emigrant families arranged sleeping places according to age long before darkness arrived. Younger children usually occupied the warmest corners, while older siblings accepted whatever space remained. Parents often slept closest to the wagon opening, allowing them to step outside quickly if livestock, weather, or unexpected noises demanded attention. The arrangement rarely looked comfortable. It usually worked. You stretch your legs carefully. Your boots now rest beside the entrance, positioned exactly where you hope to find them in the morning. You silently congratulate yourself on remembering that detail. Searching for missing boots before sunrise sounds like an adventure nobody requested. A father reaches overhead and carefully lowers a small cloth bundle suspended from one of the wooden bows. Inside are precious items that stay safely above curious little hands during the day. A family Bible, several letters tied with ribbon, a tiny silver brooch, one lock of carefully preserved hair from a relative left behind in the East. None of these objects will help repair a broken wagon wheel. None can pull an ox team. Yet every one of them has crossed hundreds of miles because some treasures measure their value differently. You notice the father unfold one letter. He does not read it aloud. Instead, he studies the familiar handwriting for a few quiet moments before folding it once again. Perhaps he already knows every word by heart. Sometimes seeing familiar handwriting is enough. Outside, footsteps pass beside the wagon before fading away. Someone quietly wishes another family good night. The reply comes little more than a whisper. No one wants to wake sleeping children. No one wants to waste energy speaking loudly. The night encourages gentleness. Near your feet, two sisters begin a conversation that is clearly supposed to remain secret. I miss Grandma. I know. Do you think she misses us? The older girl thinks for a moment. Probably every day. Silence follows. Then the younger sister nods and snuggles deeper beneath the blankets. No further explanation seems necessary. Homesickness rarely announces itself dramatically. It often arrives through small questions asked in the dark. Several surviving letters written after successful journeys describe evenings much like this one. Travellers frequently admitted that nighttime allowed memories of home to return with unexpected strength. During the busy hours of daylight, there was always another chore waiting. Once darkness settled, familiar faces and distant places had more room to visit the imagination. You understand exactly why. There is little to distract your thoughts now, only breathing, only quiet, only memory. An elderly grandmother reaches into a cloth bag and removes a tiny bundle of dried lavender wrapped in linen. She places it beside her pillow. The delicate fragrance slowly mixes with the heavier scents of wool and smoke. For just a moment the wagon smells almost like a garden. One charming custom brought from Europe involved carrying herbs whose familiar fragrance reminded families of home. Lavender, mint, rosemary, or sweet grass sometimes travelled remarkable distances tucked inside pockets or sewing baskets. Whether they truly improved sleep or simply lifted weary spirits hardly mattered. Their scent connected travellers to places far beyond the snowy prairie. You inhale again. The lavender is faint, still unmistakable. One little reminder that beauty can fit inside the smallest bundle. The lantern grows dimmer. Oil must be used carefully. The flame is lowered until it produces only a soft golden glow. Faces become gentler. Edges soften. The wagon seems wrapped inside warm shadows. A teenage boy attempts to stretch without disturbing anyone. He bumps the flour barrel. The barrel answers with a hollow thump. Every head turns. The boy freezes. Nobody speaks. After a few seconds, everyone quietly resumes settling down. The barrel has won another round. You suspect it enjoys these moments. The youngest child suddenly asks a serious question. Will the snow still be here tomorrow? His father smiles in the darkness. I expect so. What if it follows us? It probably will. The child considers this carefully. I hope it walks slower than the oxen. Several adults hide their smiles beneath blankets. Children have an extraordinary ability to negotiate with impossible ideas. The wagon grows warmer, though only slightly. Body heat from several people sharing the same confined space begins accomplishing what thick blankets alone cannot. You notice the difference first on your hands, then your face. Cold no longer dominates every thought. Comfort remains modest. Still, it is welcome. Researchers continue examining how families balance personal space with simple necessity during the overland migrations. Some memoirs describe surprisingly cheerful evenings despite the cramped quarters. Others recall moments of tension after weeks of exhausting travel. Both experiences almost certainly existed, sometimes within the very same wagon. Living this closely leaves little room for pretending. Patience becomes as valuable as flour. Kindness weighs nothing, but carries remarkably well. Outside, a horse gives a quiet snort. Farther away. A bell rings once before becoming silent again. The sounds drift through the canvas like distant echoes. No wall completely separates your little wooden room from the vast prairie beyond. You close your eyes. This time the wagon feels less like a vehicle, and more like a tiny floating island of warmth surrounded by an endless sea of snow. Sleep finally begins approaching. Not quickly, not dramatically. It arrives one slow breath at a time, just as your thoughts begin slipping toward dreams. Another sound reaches your ears, a faint voice calling from somewhere outside. The first watch of the night has begun, and while most of the camp prepares to surrender to sleep, a few determined souls are only beginning their long hours beneath the winter stars. The quiet call outside drifts through the outer canvas like a ripple across still water. First watch. No one inside the wagon answers aloud. There is no need. The words are meant for those already awake. You open your eyes again, accepting that sleep will have to wait a little longer. Curiosity proves surprisingly stubborn, even after a full day on the trail. Pulling your coat around your shoulders, you ease yourself toward the wagon opening with as little noise as possible. The cold slips inside the moment the canvas flap is lifted. It has lost none of its enthusiasm. Outside, the camp has changed completely. Only a handful of fires still burn with open flames. Most have settled into glowing beds of coals that pulse gently whenever the breeze stirs. Their soft light reaches only a short distance before surrendering to darkness. Beyond that lies the endless prairie. The snow reflects faint starlight, giving the ground a pale silver glow. Wagons stand quietly in their curved line, looking almost ghostly beneath their white canvas covers. You hear footsteps before you see the watchman. He carries a lantern whose light sways with every careful step. One hand rests comfortably near the handle of a long rifle slung over his shoulder. His pace is steady, not hurried, not lazy, simply alert. Another man waits beside the nearest fire. You take the east side. I'll circle toward the stream. The exchange lasts only a few seconds. Both know their responsibilities. Many wagon companies organize some form of night watch whenever circumstances called for it. The exact routine varied from one company to another. Smaller groups often relied on volunteers or informal agreements. Larger companies sometimes divided the night into shifts, allowing everyone at least a few hours of uninterrupted rest. Tonight, with fresh snow on the ground and valuable livestock grazing nearby, no one questions the wisdom of remaining vigilant. You quietly fall into step behind one of the watchmen, careful not to interfere with his work. He stops every so often, listening, not looking, listening. The prairie has become a world where ears are often more useful than eyes. A horse shakes its mane, leather creaks, an ox exhales slowly. Somewhere beyond the camp comes the faint rustle of dry grass moving beneath a light breeze. The watchman nods almost imperceptibly. Everything sounds normal. You realize that normal has become the most comforting word imaginable. A sudden change in those familiar sounds would demand immediate attention. The lantern casts warm circles across the snow. Tiny crystals sparkle for an instant before fading back into darkness. Your own footprints appear sharply behind you, fresh, distinct, temporary. By morning, many of them may already be hidden beneath frost or another light dusting of snow. The watchman pauses beside one of the wagons where a young father has quietly stepped outside. Everything all right so far, the children asleep. Finally, both men smile. Parents have probably exchanged that same sentence for thousands of years, not far away. A horse gives a soft whinny. Its ears point toward the open prairie. The watchman waits. Nothing follows. After several quiet moments, the horse lowers its head again. No alarm, just curiosity. The surviving record suggests that experienced teamsters gradually became remarkably skilled at recognizing ordinary nighttime sounds. They learned the difference between restless livestock, shifting weather, and noises that deserved immediate investigation, like sailors reading the sea. They depended upon constant observation more than dramatic heroics. You admire that quiet confidence. No grand speeches, no unnecessary excitement, just patient attention. As you continue walking, the air grows noticeably colder away from the fading fires. Your breath hangs before your face in slow white clouds. You tuck your hands deeper into your sleeves. The stars above seem impossibly bright now, without moonlight competing for attention. The Milky Way stretches across the sky like a pale river. It almost appears close enough to touch. One older watchman glances upward. My grandfather used to say those stars pointed west before any wagon did. No one argues. Whether literally true hardly matters. It is a pleasant thought. Around some evening fires, people quietly repeated the idea that a particularly brilliant winter sky promised clear weather for the following day. Modern meteorology might raise an eyebrow, yet such observations helped travellers feel connected to the landscape they crossed. Even uncertain traditions offered comfort when reliable forecasts did not exist. You continue toward the stream. Thin ice has begun forming along the edges since sunset. Water still moves steadily beneath it, producing a gentle murmuring sound. It reminds you that nothing in nature is completely still. Even the cold keeps moving. The watchman kneels briefly, examining the snowy bank. Several sets of tracks cross the area. Most belong to cattle brought here earlier. A smaller trail catches his attention. He studies it without speaking. You crouch beside him. The prints are delicate. 4 narrow toes, small claws, a fox, perhaps. He smiles faintly. Nothing to worry about. You find yourself strangely relieved. Researchers have long compared trail journals to determine how travellers interpreted signs in the landscape. Some emigrants identified tracks with impressive accuracy, while others admitted they often guessed. Knowledge varied enormously depending on previous experience with wilderness travel. You would almost certainly belong to the guessing group. The watch continues. The rhythm becomes almost meditative. Walk, pause, listen, look, walk again. Minutes blend together until measuring time seems unnecessary. The camp remains peaceful. A baby cries briefly from one wagon before settling again. Somewhere another traveller coughs. A dog lifts its head, watches the darkness for a few moments, then curls back into its sleeping place beside the embers. You begin noticing how much trust exists within the camp. Dozens of people sleep because a handful remain awake. Soon those awake will rest while others take their place. Everyone depends upon everyone else. The arrangement is simple. It is also deeply reassuring. One young guard quietly admits this is only his 3rd night serving watch. Nervous asks his companion, "A little?" "Good." The younger man looks surprised. If you stop paying attention, that's when you should worry. The lesson hangs comfortably between them. No further explanation is needed. Far across the prairie comes another distant coyote call. This time nobody even reaches for a weapon. The sound is familiar now, part of the landscape. Not every mystery hides danger. The breeze freshens slightly. Snow crystals drift from the wagon covers, sparkling briefly as they fall. The camp itself seems asleep. Only the lanterns continue moving slowly through the darkness, marking the patient work of those who guard the night. You suddenly understand that standing watch is not only about protecting wagons or livestock, it is also about protecting sleep itself. The children dreaming beneath quilts, the weary parents finally resting after endless miles, the elderly travellers gathering strength for another difficult day. Someone must remain awake so everyone else can surrender, if only for a little while. Eventually another quiet voice reaches you across the camp. Second watch. The shift is changing. Fresh footsteps approach, while tired ones turn back toward waiting blankets. The lantern passes gently from one hand to another. The night goes on. The responsibility simply changes shoulders. You watch the first guard disappear toward his wagon, moving with the slow, careful walk of someone whose bed has suddenly become the finest destination in the entire American West, inside the wagons. However, peaceful sleep remains more complicated than anyone hoped, even with careful watches, glowing embers, and quiet animals. The darkness still carries 1,000 little sounds that refuse to let the prairie fall completely silent. The lantern changes hands, and the quiet footsteps of the new watch drift away into the darkness. You ease yourself back toward the wagon, certain that sleep must finally be waiting. It has other plans. The moment you settle beneath the blankets again, another sound reaches your ears, a slow wooden groan, not loud, not alarming, simply the wagon reminding everyone that wood never truly stops moving. As the temperature drops, beams shrink almost imperceptibly. Pegs tighten. Joints complain in soft little murmurs that seem surprisingly loud in the middle of the night. You wait. Another creak answers from somewhere farther down the line of wagons, then another. It is almost like listening to an old house settling after sunset. Before long, you stop noticing individual noises and begin hearing the camp as one living thing. The wind brushes across dozens of canvas covers at once. The fabric responds with a gentle flutter that rises and falls like distant waves along a quiet shore. Somewhere close by, a loose rope taps rhythmically against a wooden support. Tap, pause, tap, pause. No one bothers tightening it tonight. The sound is too harmless to justify climbing out into the cold. You pull the blanket higher beneath your chin. Your breathing slows. Then comes a cough. Not yours. Someone 2 wagons away. It echoes softly through the still air before fading again. Another traveller clears a throat. A baby gives a sleepy little whimper and is soothed almost immediately. The sounds overlap without disturbing one another. No family lives entirely alone out here. Everyone shares a little of everyone else's night. Across the camp an ox shifts its weight. The heavy movement presses snow beneath broad hooves with a muffled crunch. Another answers with a deep, contented sigh that sounds almost impossibly relaxed. You find yourself envying that talent. If only people could settle as easily. A faint breeze slips under the edge of the canvas. It touches your cheek before disappearing again. Cold has become surprisingly polite. It rarely announces itself anymore, it simply arrives. Your eyes remain closed. Your ears grow busier instead. Without daylight demanding attention, hearing takes over. You begin separating sounds almost without thinking. Canvas, leather, wood, snow, breathing, a distant bell, another creak, a quiet yawn. Every little noise claims its own place inside the darkness. Children seem blessed with a remarkable ability to ignore nearly all of it. One little boy continues sleeping so deeply that a nearby wagon wheel gives a sharp crack as frost tightens around its iron rim. Yet he never stirs. His father, on the other hand, opens one eye immediately. Parenthood appears to include permanent light sleeping. Overland travellers occasionally wrote about the surprising orchestra created by a wagon camp after dark. They described rattling harness chains, restless livestock, crackling embers, snoring companions, and the constant conversation between wind and canvas. Many admitted that these unfamiliar sounds eventually became reassuring because silence often suggested that something was wrong. You are beginning to understand. If every bell stopped, if every animal became completely still, if the wind vanished all at once, that would feel stranger than all this gentle noise. Outside, one of the camp dogs suddenly lifts its head. Its ears stand upright. It listens for several long seconds. Your own attention sharpens immediately. Nothing follows. The dog circles once, settles down again, and sighs with complete satisfaction. Apparently whatever caught its interest failed to impress. Your heart takes a little longer to receive that message. Somewhere beyond the edge of camp an owl calls. The note hangs in the cold air before fading into the open prairie. An older woman lying nearby smiles without opening her eyes. My mother always said owls kept lonely travellers company. No one responds. Perhaps everyone is pretending to sleep. Perhaps they simply enjoy the thought. Whether the bird agrees is another question entirely. A few minutes later, the breeze freshens just enough to shake loose tiny crystals from the wagon cover. They patter softly onto the snow outside. The sound is so delicate that it resembles dry leaves falling through an autumn forest. Winter has borrowed autumn's voice for a moment. The wagon beside yours produces another long groan. You almost expect it. Wood remembers the warmth of daylight for only so long before surrendering completely to the night's cold grip. A young girl murmurs something in her sleep. You catch only one word, home, then silence returns. The word lingers far longer than the sound itself. Memory seems to travel most easily after midnight. Many families discovered that familiar routines made unfamiliar places feel less intimidating. Evening prayers, folded blankets arranged in the same order, carefully placed boots. Even a favourite cup used every morning helped create a sense of home inside a world that changed almost daily. The wagon may move, the habits remain. Your hand brushes the folded edge of your blanket without realising it. You have tucked it exactly the same way several nights in a row. Perhaps routines comfort everyone more than they realise. Time passes strangely now. There is no clock, no church bell, no glowing numbers beside the bed. Only the gradual cooling of embers and the slow journey of stars across the open sky. You estimate an hour has passed. It might have been 20 minutes. It might have been 2 hours. Night keeps its own schedule. Another sound rises from somewhere toward the rear of the camp. Snoring, deep, steady, unapologetic. It continues with remarkable confidence. Someone nearby quietly mutters, "He'll scare away every wolf for 50 miles. A few muffled laughs disappear beneath blankets. Even the snoring continues without interruption. It has clearly accepted its role. You smile into the darkness. Frontier humour rarely required elaborate performances. Sometimes one sleeping neighbour provided enough entertainment. The stars outside continue shining through clear skies. Frost thickens along wagon wheels and harness buckles. Every exposed surface slowly gathers a silver edge. By sunrise, the entire camp will appear transformed. For now, however, the prairie belongs to shadows and whispers. Your eyelids grow heavier. The countless little sounds no longer compete for attention. Instead, they begin blending together. The creaking wood joins the fluttering canvas. The bells mingle with breathing livestock. The distant owl becomes another thread in the night's quiet tapestry. None of it feels unfamiliar anymore. The camp has its own heartbeat, slow, patient, steady. At last your thoughts begin drifting somewhere between waking and sleep. The noises continue around you, but they no longer ask to be understood. They simply exist, and just as true rest finally starts reaching for you. An unexpected fit of coughing rises from another wagon, reminding everyone that the cold carries challenges far beyond simple discomfort, especially for those whose strength has already been worn thin by months on the trail. The cough fades into the darkness, but the sound remains with you for a while. A single cough on a quiet night can feel surprisingly large. During the day, there are wagon wheels turning, animals moving, people talking, tools being repaired, meals being prepared. The world is busy enough to hide small discomforts. At night, every sound receives attention. You listen for another cough. There is one, then silence. Perhaps the traveller simply swallowed wrong. Perhaps the cold air irritated a tired throat, or perhaps the long journey's beginning to collect its debts. You settle deeper beneath the blankets and think about how fragile health can feel out here. A small illness that would be inconvenient at home becomes much more complicated when your nearest doctor may be days away, and your medicine chest contains only what the family remembered to bring. The trail does not provide easy solutions. It demands patience. It demands creativity. It demands that ordinary people become experts in surviving situations they never expected to face. Inside another wagon, a mother quietly prepares a cup of warm liquid for a child with a rough cough. She adds honey saved carefully for moments exactly like this. The child drinks slowly, then rests against her shoulder. The treatment is simple. The comfort is enormous. Families carried many remedies with them across the plains. Some were based on practical experience. Others came from traditions passed through generations. A person might know which herbs helped soothe a sore throat, how to wrap a sprained ankle, or when a fever required serious concern. Medical knowledge travelled west in pockets. Sometimes it arrived in a proper medicine box. Sometimes it arrived in a grandmother's memory. You notice how often people whisper when discussing illness. Not because they are embarrassed, because sickness changes the mood of an entire camp. Everyone understands that one person's weakness can become everyone's problem. If someone cannot walk, someone else must help. If a parent becomes ill, children and neighbours often take on additional tasks. The wagon train survives through shared effort. Not because everyone always agrees, not because everyone is always cheerful, because survival leaves little room for complete isolation. A man near the fire examines a small collection of bottles inside a wooden box. The labels are worn, the contents are limited. He checks them carefully before returning everything to its place. The box itself looks almost more valuable than the medicine. It represents preparation, hope packed into a container. Frontier families often relied on familiar household treatments such as herbal teas, salves, rest, and careful attention to diet. Professional medical care was scarce along many migration routes, and formal medical knowledge in the 1840s was still developing. Treatments available today would have seemed impossible luxuries. No one here expects miracles. They hope for recovery. Sometimes that's enough. You remember how warm the evening meal felt only a few hours ago. Now the same cold that made the snow beautiful is also working quietly against tired bodies. The problem is not only temperature, it is exhaustion. Months of travel weaken people slowly. Long walks, heavy lifting, poor sleep, changing weather, limited food choices. Each difficulty adds another small weight. A healthy person can carry many weights. Eventually, everyone feels the burden. One elderly traveller wraps a scarf higher around his face before settling back down. His movements are slower than they were earlier in the journey, but he refuses offers of help whenever possible. Pride travels well, sometimes too well. An old trail saying claimed that keeping your feet warm was the secret to keeping the entire body healthy. While the idea was not a complete medical explanation, many travellers understood the practical importance of dry footwear. Cold, wet feet could make a miserable journey feel almost impossible. You glance toward your own boots. They sit beside the wagon entrance. Slightly improved, but still far from perfect. You decide they have earned respect, not affection, respect. A little later, someone quietly mentions a traveller who recovered from sickness after resting near a particular spring earlier in the journey. The story has grown with each retelling, as stories often do. By now the spring probably possesses magical qualities. Maybe it cures everything. Maybe it simply offered clean water and a place to rest. Either way, people remember places that helped them. The landscape becomes part of their personal history. The cough returns from the nearby wagon, this time longer. A few heads lift. The mother inside quickly checks on the child. A father reaches for another blanket. Nobody says much. Sometimes kindness is expressed through action rather than conversation. You watch as someone quietly leaves a small bundle of dried fruit near the wagon entrance. No announcement, no expectation of thanks, just help. The gesture disappears almost as quickly as it appears. Researchers examining emigrant diaries often find that descriptions of hardship are accompanied by countless examples of cooperation. The trail was dangerous and exhausting, but it was also filled with ordinary acts of generosity that rarely appear in dramatic retellings. History remembers disasters easily. It sometimes forgets small kindnesses. The fire nearby has become mostly embers now. A traveller carefully adds another piece of wood. The flame rises briefly, faces appear, then shadows return. Everyone is aware that fuel must be used wisely. A warm fire tonight means less wood tomorrow. A comfortable moment always has a cost. You listen again. The sick child is quiet. The camp settles. Perhaps the worst has passed. Perhaps morning will bring improvement. No one can know. That uncertainty is one of the hardest parts of life on the trail. People learn to live without complete answers. They make plans, they adjust, they continue. The night deepens. Your body wants sleep. Your mind continues noticing details. The smell of smoke, the weight of blankets, the distant sound of animals, the occasional cough, the soft movement of someone checking the fire. Every sense remains connected to the camp around you. Eventually, the coughing stops. The silence that follows feels different, not empty, peaceful. You allow yourself to relax again. The wagon feels warmer now, or perhaps you've simply adapted. Humans are remarkably good at adjusting to discomfort when there is no other choice. A few months ago, sleeping beside a wooden barrel on frozen ground would have sounded impossible. Tonight, it feels almost ordinary. Almost. The first light of morning is still many hours away. Before then, there are other challenges waiting. The coldest part of the night is approaching. When fires burn lowest, blankets feel thinnest, and even the most experienced travellers must fight the temptation to stop paying attention. The wagon grows quiet again, but quiet does not mean private. That is one of the first lessons you learn after spending a night inside a crowded wagon train. Canvas walls offer shelter from snow. They offer very little separation from other human beings. A person sneezing 3 wagons away might as well be standing beside you. A whispered conversation near the fire can travel farther than expected. A baby crying in the darkness becomes everyone's temporary companion. Life on the trail is shared whether you planned for it or not. You lie beneath the blankets, listening to the gentle movement around camp, and think about how different this world is from the one most people imagine when they picture a home. A home usually means doors, walls, corners that belong only to you. Here, a home is a space that moves, a space where cooking supplies, clothing, tools, memories, children, parents, and sometimes entire family histories all compete for the same few feet. Privacy becomes something you carefully create rather than something you automatically possess. Inside the wagon, you notice the small routines people develop to preserve a little personal dignity. A woman turns her back while changing a child's clothing. A man waits until others step outside before repairing a torn shirt. A young couple lowers their voices when discussing personal matters. Nobody needs to explain the rules. Everyone understands them. When dozens of people travel together for months, courtesy becomes essential, not because everyone is naturally patient, because there is nowhere else to escape. One person's bad mood can fill an entire wagon. One person's kindness can do the same. The morning will bring chores that require privacy of a different kind. Washing, changing clothes, and taking care of personal needs all become complicated when the nearest trees or bushes may be the only available barrier between yourself and the rest of the company. You begin to appreciate how much modern life hides from us. A simple trip to the bathroom becomes an adventure. A private shower becomes an impossible luxury. A quiet moment alone becomes something worth remembering. Women and men often had to negotiate these challenges differently. Clothing styles of the era were not designed for quick movement or convenience, especially when layered for cold weather. Long skirts, multiple garments, and heavy fabrics made ordinary tasks slower and more complicated. Yet people adapted. They always did. A woman near the wagon entrance carefully arranges a shawl around her shoulders before stepping outside. She checks the darkness first. Not from fear, but from habit. Another traveller holds a blanket as a temporary screen while a family member changes clothing behind it. It is not elegant, it is practical. Practicality becomes its own form of elegance out here. Trail journals frequently mention the importance of modesty and manners within wagon companies, even during difficult journeys. Many emigrants try to maintain familiar social customs from their previous lives. They dressed carefully when possible, respected boundaries, and created small traditions that helped preserve a sense of normal society. A person can travel thousands of miles and still want to feel civilized, especially when surrounded by mud, snow, and exhausted livestock. You notice how people protect small pieces of normal life. A woman brushes her hair before sunrise even though nobody would criticize her for not doing so. A man shaves when supplies and weather allow. Children are reminded to wash their faces. These actions may seem unnecessary when survival requires so much effort, but they matter. They remind people that they are more than travelers. They are still themselves. An unusual habit mentioned in some frontier accounts involved travelers carrying small mirrors despite limited space. At first glance, a mirror seems like a strange object to bring across hundreds of miles. Yet for many people it represented more than appearance. Seeing a familiar face, even a tired one, offered a connection to ordinary life. You look toward the tiny mirror hanging near one wagon wall. Its surface is scratched. The reflection is imperfect. Still, it shows a person who made it this far. Sometimes that is enough. Outside, two travelers quietly discuss whether they should wash before morning or wait until later. The debate is not about cleanliness alone. Water must be collected. Fuel must be considered. Weather must cooperate. Every simple choice carries a hidden list of complications. The stream nearby may be close, but cold water and freezing temperatures discourage unnecessary trips. You realize that many modern routines are built around convenience. Out here, every routine must negotiate with nature. The night continues. Someone laughs quietly after hearing a joke from inside another wagon. The laughter spreads, then it fades. Even humor must respect sleeping neighbors. A child asks why everyone speaks so softly after dark. Her father replies, "Because everyone is tired." That answer seems to explain nearly everything. Fatigue changes people. It makes small annoyances feel larger. It also makes kindness more meaningful. When someone shares a blanket, offers food, or holds a lantern while another person completes a task. The gesture carries extra weight. Everyone is tired. Everyone is cold. Everyone understands. The documentary record from Wagon Journeys does not always provide a clear picture of how every company handled personal boundaries. Some accounts describe strict social rules, while others suggest people became far more relaxed about privacy simply because circumstances demanded it. The truth likely depended on the personalities within each group. A wagon train was not one single culture. It was dozens of small communities travelling together. Each had its own habits, its own expectations, its own quiet disagreements. You imagine the conversations that never made it into journals, arguments over sleeping positions, complaints about noise, disagreements about chores, moments when someone wanted 5 minutes alone but had nowhere to go. These details rarely become famous parts of history, yet they are probably some of the most human. The wagon shifts slightly as the wind presses against the canvas. Everyone inside adjusts automatically. Nobody wakes fully. Months of travel have taught the body certain habits. Sleep lightly, listen carefully, move gently. The night watch continues outside. The animals continue breathing. The snow continues covering the prairie. And inside these tiny wooden rooms, people continue finding ways to live together, not perfectly, not comfortably by modern standards, but successfully enough to reach another sunrise. As your eyes begin growing heavy again, you notice one final thing. The absence of privacy has created something unexpected. Connection. Everyone knows the sounds of everyone else. The coughs, the laughter, the whispered worries, the sleepy conversations, the small victories, the quiet struggles. The wagon walls may be thin, but they have created a community closer than many people would ever experience at home. Soon sleep returns, but tomorrow, when the wagons move again, everyone will carry not only their supplies and possessions, but also the invisible knowledge that surviving the trail depends on learning how to share the same space. Even when that space feels impossibly small, the night slowly loosens its grip, but sleep does not arrive all at once. Instead, the wagon settles into a gentle rhythm of half waking and half dreaming. Outside, the fires have become small glowing circles. Inside, blankets are pulled close, children breathe softly, and tired travellers discover that sometimes the hardest part of a difficult day is finally allowing yourself to rest. Yet people have always found ways to fill the quiet hours, even on the coldest nights. Even after the longest miles, stories survive. A low voice begins somewhere near the nearest wagon. At first you cannot make out the words. The speaker is too far away. And the canvas between you turns the sound into a soft murmur. Then someone laughs, not loudly, just enough. Another voice joins. Soon a small conversation grows beside the fading fire. You recognize something important. The wagon train is not only a collection of travellers, it is a collection of memories. Every person here carries stories from somewhere else. A farm left behind, a childhood near a river, a town that no longer feels close enough to visit, a family member waiting at the end of the trail. The stories become another kind of shelter, a warm blanket made of words. You step outside briefly, wrapped tightly in your coat, and move closer to the fire where several travellers remain awake. Nobody seems eager to sleep immediately. The cold has encouraged everyone to gather together whenever possible. A man begins telling a story about his first attempt at crossing a river with a wagon. The details grow larger with every sentence. The water becomes deeper. The wagon becomes heavier. The horse becomes more stubborn. By the end of the story, the horse appears to have personally challenged the entire river. Everyone knows the tale has improved with age. Nobody cares. A good story does not need to be perfectly accurate to be useful. It needs to make people smile. Travellers along the Western trails often relied on music, storytelling, and conversation to maintain morale during difficult journeys. Evening gatherings were not simply entertainment. They helped preserve community when people were separated from familiar homes and surrounded by uncertainty. Someone produces a small instrument, perhaps a fiddle, perhaps a simple harmonica. The exact sound matters less than the feeling it creates. A few notes drift across the camp. The melody is imperfect. The performance is not polished. It is also wonderful. The music seems to push against the cold, not physically, emotionally, for a moment. Nobody's thinking about frozen boots, limited supplies, or the difficult miles waiting tomorrow. They are simply listening. A woman begins singing a familiar hymn. Her voice is quiet at first. Another person joins, then another. Soon, several voices blend together beneath the open sky. The song does not need to be beautiful. It only needs to belong to everyone. You look around the circle of faces illuminated by firelight. Some are young, some are old. Some have travelled only a short distance. Others have already crossed landscapes that once seemed impossible. Yet tonight they share the same moment, the same fire, the same song. One of the more unusual habits mentioned in Pioneer Recollections was the practice of saving certain songs, or poems for specific moments of hardship. Some families carried handwritten verses tucked inside trunks or Bibles, bringing familiar words along with practical supplies. A few pages of poetry could weigh almost nothing, and still provide comfort worth far more than their physical size suggested. You imagine a small folded paper travelling hundreds of miles inside a wagon, creased, worn, carefully protected. Tiny piece of home moving west. The conversation changes naturally. Someone asks about tomorrow's weather. Another person guesses. Someone else tells an old saying about snow. A child insists that animals know secrets people cannot understand. The adults do not completely disagree. Children often notice things adults overlook. The discussion turns toward places everyone misses. A farmer describes the smell of spring fields. A woman remembers a kitchen where bread cooled beside a window. Someone talks about autumn leaves changing colours. The prairie is beautiful. Nobody denies that. But beauty does not erase homesickness. Sometimes the most beautiful landscapes are the ones that remind you what you left behind. Modern researchers examining emigrant writings often find that emotional survival was just as important as physical survival. Letters and diaries reveal not only hunger, weather, and distance, but also loneliness, hope, humour, and the desire to create familiar moments in unfamiliar places. A wagon train moved forward because people carried more than supplies. They carried meaning. A fire crackles, a spark rises into the darkness. For a second it resembles a tiny star. Then it disappears. An older traveller watches the sparks carefully. He says that every campfire sends a little piece of the journey into the sky. Nobody asks whether that is scientifically true. Some ideas are valuable because they sound right. The snow around the camp reflects the firelight, making everything appear softer. The wagons no longer look like rough wooden machines. They look like homes, temporary ones, fragile ones, but homes nonetheless. You notice that even arguments seem smaller around a fire. Earlier, people worried about cramped spaces and uncomfortable sleeping arrangements. Now someone shares extra tobacco. Someone offers another person the warmer side of the fire. Someone tells a joke about a stubborn mule. The mule, according to the story, has become famous for refusing 3 different paths and choosing a 4th nobody wanted. The animal is described as intelligent. The owner describes it as difficult. The truth probably sits somewhere between those opinions. The camp dogs lie nearby, listening to everything with serious expressions. They appear to believe they are important members of the conversation. They may be correct. A dog that guards supplies, follows the herd, and provides companionship earns a certain amount of respect. The night grows colder. People begin leaving the fire one by one. The stories do not end because everyone runs out of things to say. They end because tomorrow requires energy. One final song fades, one final joke disappears, one final goodbye is exchanged. You return toward the wagon carrying the warmth of the fire with you. It will not last forever, nothing on the trail does, but for a while it remains inside the wagon. Blankets wait exactly where you left them. The space feels smaller than before, yet somehow more welcoming. You understand now that comfort does not always come from having more. Sometimes it comes from knowing who is beside you. The wind moves over the canvas, the snow continues resting across the prairie. The voices outside grow quieter. Soon the camp will be almost completely asleep. But the memory of the fire, the songs, and the laughter will remain long after the night is gone. The last voices around the fire disappear one by one. A final ember collapses. A final set of footsteps presses through the snow. Then the camp returns to its deeper nighttime rhythm. You climb back beneath the blankets, carrying a small memory of warmth with you. The fire has left its scent on your coat and hair. Your hands remember the heat. Your face remembers the glow, but the cold remembers you too. The hours after midnight have a reputation for feeling longer than any other part of the night. The excitement of evening has faded. The promise of morning is still distant. The fires are lower, the blankets are cooler, and every traveller must negotiate with the uncomfortable truth that warmth requires constant effort. You pull the covers closer. The first few minutes are manageable. Then you notice your feet. Always the feet. They seem to have their own opinion about the entire situation. You move your toes inside your socks, trying to encourage circulation without disturbing anyone nearby. A small victory. The cold does not leave. It simply becomes less noticeable. Outside, the firekeeper adds another piece of wood to the embers. The flames rise briefly, painting the wagon canvas with flickering orange light. Then they settle again. Fuel disappears quickly on a winter night. Every log has to be collected, carried, and saved. Travellers learn to think about firewood almost like money. A careless evening could mean a difficult morning. You remember the afternoon search for timber, the careful decisions, the limited supply, the way everyone looked at each piece of wood before placing it into the fire. Nothing here is ordinary, not even a small branch. One traveller quietly steps outside and checks the coals. His shadow stretches across the snow, enormous beneath the stars. He adjusts the fire and returns. A simple task, an important one. The camp depends on people who are willing to wake up when everyone else is sleeping. Early overland companies often organize their evenings around these small responsibilities. Someone watched the animals. Someone protected the fire. Someone checked the wagons. These duties were rarely dramatic, but they prevented many problems before sunrise. You begin noticing how much survival depends on ordinary actions done consistently. A tightened rope, a covered ember, a repaired strap, a dry blanket. History often remembers journeys because they crossed great distances. It is easier to forget the thousands of small decisions that allowed the journey to continue. The wagon creaks again. This time the sound is sharper. Cold temperatures are not gentle on wood. The frame contracts, joints tighten, and materials that seemed flexible during warmer days become stubborn and rigid. The wagon complains. You cannot blame it. It has carried an entire household across hundreds of miles. It deserves the occasional complaint. A little farther away, someone wakes and quietly asks if the fire is still burning. A sleepy answer comes back. Enough. That word feels important. Not warm, not comfortable. Enough. On the trail, Enough is often the goal. Enough food, enough water, enough fuel, enough strength to continue tomorrow. You close your eyes again. Your mind drifts toward the landscape outside. The prairie at this hour must look almost unreal. Snow covering the grass, wagons standing silently, animals resting, stars overhead. No movement except the occasional watchman walking slowly through the darkness. An old belief among some frontier travellers suggested that the coldest part of the night carried special meaning, as though surviving those hours proved a person's determination. Whether anyone truly believed this or simply needed encouragement is impossible to know, but such sayings helped people transform discomfort into a story they could endure. There is something powerful about giving hardship a purpose. A difficult night becomes a challenge becomes a memory becomes a story. You hear someone shifting nearby, a blanket adjustment, a quiet sigh, a whispered complaint about the cold, then silence. Even experienced travellers had moments when the weather felt overwhelming. Strength did not mean never struggling. It meant continuing despite the struggle. The hours pass slowly. Your body begins finding small sources of comfort. The blanket beneath your shoulder is warmed. The wool near your feet feels less cold. Your breathing creates a tiny pocket of warmth around your face. Small comforts gather, one by one, like pieces of firewood. You realize that surviving the night works much the same way. Nobody defeats winter with one great action. They defeat it through hundreds of tiny choices, a better layer of clothing, a shared blanket, a carefully protected fire, a neighbour checking on another neighbour, a child given the warmest corner, a cup of something hot before sleep. The trail rewards attention, not bravery alone. A traveller once described winter camping by saying that the cold always wins eventually. But people can still make it work harder than necessary. The phrase remains memorable because it captures something true about frontier life. Nature sets the conditions. People search for ways to respond. You listen again. The camp remains peaceful. The animals are calm. The watch continues. The fires survive. For now. Everything is holding together. Outside. Frost thickens on the wagon wheels. The leather straps become stiff. The metal fittings become painfully cold to touch. Tomorrow morning, every traveller will discover exactly which pieces of equipment need extra patience before they can be used again. But that is tomorrow's problem. Tonight belongs to endurance. The stars slowly shift. The darkness gradually changes. You cannot see dawn yet, but something in the air feels different. The night is moving forward. It always does, no matter how long it feels, no matter how cold it becomes. Morning is always somewhere ahead. Your thoughts become slower. The sounds around you soften, the creaking wagon, the distant bells, the breathing animals, the low movement of the fire, they all blend together. The coldest hours are not defeated through force, they are endured through patience. You finally understand why travellers spoke so often about reaching the next sunrise. It was not only about seeing daylight again, it was proof. Another night survived, another challenge completed, another small victory on a journey made of countless small victories. Your eyes grow heavier. The wagon settles. The camp breathes. Sleep begins returning. And as you drift closer, you know that when morning finally arrives, the prairie will reveal everything the darkness has hidden. The snow, the frozen ground, the condition of the wagons, the strength of the animals, the decisions waiting for the travellers who must soon rise and continue west. Sleep finally finds you. But it does not arrive like the deep, uninterrupted rest you might know at home. It comes in pieces, a few minutes of warmth, a strange dream, a brief awakening, another search for a comfortable position. The wagon remains still, but your mind remembers movement. After travelling for so many days, your body has learned a rhythm that does not disappear simply because the wheels have stopped turning. You almost feel the wagon moving beneath you. A gentle sway, a slow rocking, a familiar rhythm created by miles of prairie roads and countless hours spent listening to wooden wheels roll over uneven ground. You open your eyes briefly. The wagon is perfectly still. Only the imagination continues travelling. There is nothing unusual about sleeping after a long journey. The body may be resting, but the mind often continues processing everything it has experienced. These sounds, smells, and movements of the trail become part of dreams. You drift again. The prairie appears in your sleep, not exactly as it is. Dreams rarely respect accurate geography. The wagon moves across endless grasslands beneath a ski larger than any sky you remember seeing before. The wheels turn smoothly. The animals walk effortlessly. The road ahead seems simple. Dreams are generous that way. They remove the mud. They remove the cold. They remove the moments when everyone wonders whether the journey's worth continuing. Then another sound brings you back. A horse shifting outside, a quiet bell, a cough, a voice whispering. The dream fades, reality returns. You are still inside the wagon, still surrounded by blankets, still somewhere in the middle of a snowy night on the Western Trail. The boundary between sleep and waking becomes strangely thin. You hear conversations that may be real, or perhaps they are memories. A voice from home, a familiar song, a face you have not seen in months. Travellers often carried their past with them in ways that were invisible. A wooden box could hold letters. A small object could preserve a memory. A recipe remembered from childhood could bring comfort even when the original kitchen was impossibly far away. Distance changes how people value ordinary things. A simple smell can become precious. A familiar phrase can become a treasure. You turn beneath the blanket. The wagon floor presses firmly beneath you. A reminder that this is not a dream. Not completely. Many emigrants described the strange experience of feeling connected to both the place they had left and the place they hoped to reach. The journey created a temporary state of being between two worlds. They were no longer fully part of their old lives, yet they had not arrived at the new ones they imagined. You understand that feeling tonight. You're between places, between yesterday and tomorrow, between exhaustion and recovery, between winter darkness and morning light. The wagon feels like a small island floating through time. Outside, the prairie continues existing without concern for your thoughts. Snow rests on the ground. Stars move across the sky. Animals breathe. The wind changes direction. Nature continues its quiet work. Inside the wagon, dreams return. This time you remember a warm room, a table, a familiar chair, the sound of rain against a window. Then the dream shifts. The window becomes canvas. The rain becomes snow. The chair becomes a wooden wagon floor. Your mind blends old memories with new experiences until they become impossible to separate. Perhaps that is how places become home. Not by replacing what came before, by joining it. A curious practice among some travellers was keeping small journals or recording daily observations whenever time and materials allowed. Not everyone wrote regularly, but those who did preserved tiny details that might otherwise have disappeared. A note about weather, a difficult crossing, or an ordinary meal could later become a window into a life that would have otherwise been forgotten. You imagine someone many years later reading these words, trying to understand this night, trying to picture the cold, the snow, the crowded wagon, the quiet courage required just to sleep. The thought feels strangely comforting. Every ordinary moment can become history, even this one. The sound of someone turning over beneath a blanket, the smell of smoke trapped in wool, the feeling of cold air near your face, the faint pressure of the wagon wall beside you. None of these details seem important while they're happening, yet they are exactly the details that reveal what life felt like. The night continues. At some point you wake again. You're unsure why. Perhaps the temperature dropped. Perhaps a dream ended. Perhaps your body simply remembered that it is sleeping somewhere unfamiliar. You listen. The camp sounds different, quieter. The animals are settled. The watchmen speak less frequently. The fires are low. This must be the deepest part of the night, the hour when even the strongest travellers begin counting the minutes until dawn. You think about tomorrow. The wagons will move again. The snow may remain. The trail may be difficult. There will be more walking, more repairs, more decisions. Yet tomorrow is not here yet. For now, there is only this moment, this breath, this small pocket of warmth beneath the blankets. You let yourself rest. The strange thing about hardship is that people often remember not only the difficulty, but also the unexpected beauty surrounding it. The stars, the songs, the shared meals, the kindness of strangers, the laughter around the fire, the quiet confidence of animals resting nearby. A difficult journey can contain gentle moments, sometimes especially because it is difficult. You begin drifting again. The wagon returns, the road returns, the endless western landscape returns. But this time, the dream is calmer. There is no urgency, no fear, only movement. A slow journey beneath a wide sky, somewhere between dreaming and waking. You understand something the travellers themselves probably learned gradually. A wagon train is not only about reaching a destination, it is about the thousands of small moments that happen between leaving and arriving. The cold nights, the shared fires, the whispered conversations, the people who walk beside you, the people who help when you're tired, the people who make an unfamiliar place feel less lonely. Your breathing slows, the wagon remains still. Morning is approaching, although you cannot see it yet. Soon the darkness will begin to fade. Soon the camp will wake. Soon everyone will discover what the snowfall has left behind for now. You remain suspended in that quiet space between night and morning, where the prairie feels endless and the journey feels almost dreamlike. The first hint of morning does not arrive as a sudden announcement. It comes quietly, a slight change in the darkness, a softer shade of blue beyond the canvas, a feeling that the night has finally begun releasing its hold. You open your eyes slowly. For a moment, you forget where you are. Then the familiar details return, the wooden wall beside you, the folded blankets beneath you, the faint smell of smoke, the cold air near the wagon opening. Another night has passed. You made it. That simple realization carries more weight than you expect. Outside, the camp is not yet awake, but the prairie already feels different. The stars have faded. The horizon has become a thin line between darkness and daylight. Snow covers nearly everything, smoothing away yesterday's tracks and turning the landscape into something almost untouched. Almost. The wagons tell another story. They stand exactly where people left them, but the snow has changed their appearance. Canvas covers sag slightly beneath the weight. Wheels wear a delicate layer of frost. Harnesses look stiff and frozen. The peaceful beauty comes with a price. You step outside carefully. Your boots meet the cold ground with a sharp crunch. Immediately. You understand that morning on the trail has its own challenges. Everything that was wet yesterday is now colder. Everything that was loose yesterday may now be stiff. Every tool that was forgotten outside has become a small problem waiting to be solved. A traveller reaches for a metal bucket near the fire. He pauses. The handle is frozen. He laughs quietly before wrapping his glove around it. The prairie has provided another lesson. Object remember the weather. You walk toward the animals first. They are already stirring. The oxen stand slowly, shaking snow from their backs. Their movements are calm, but the cold has affected them too. They need time before work begins. Harnesses must be checked. Feet must be examined. Frozen equipment must be handled carefully. The morning routine cannot be rushed. A wagon train does not wake up all at once. It wakes in stages. First the people responsible for fires, then those checking animals, then those preparing breakfast, then everyone else. The camp gradually transforms from a sleeping village into a moving community. A man walks around the wagons inspecting wheels. Another searches beneath the snow for items that may have fallen during the evening. A child is sent back 3 times to find a missing mitten. The mitten is eventually discovered exactly where everyone expected it would be, inside the wagon. A small mystery solved before breakfast. The snow reveals some things and hides others. That is the strange nature of winter travel. You notice the tracks left by animals overnight. The cattle moved only a short distance. The horses stayed near their usual area. The dogs wandered around the edge of camp before returning to familiar sleeping spots. The snow has recorded the night's activities like a quiet journal. Early travellers depended heavily on understanding these signs, knowing where animals had moved, where water remained accessible, and how weather affected the ground could determine whether a day went smoothly or became a struggle. The landscape was not just scenery, it was information. A woman near one wagon lifts the canvas cover and immediately begins removing supplies. Not everything can remain packed after a snowy night. Cooking equipment must be found. Clothing must be checked. Food must be protected. The wagon slowly reveals itself again. During the night, it was a bedroom. Now it becomes a kitchen, a storage room, a workshop, a vehicle, a home, all within a few minutes. You watch as someone carefully knocks snow from a wagon bow. The action seems simple, but every movement is deliberate. Too much force could damage the frozen material. Winter rewards patience. It punishes impatience. The first breakfast fires appear across the camp. Smoke rises into the pale morning air, creating thin grey columns against the white landscape. The smell of coffee returns. The smell alone seems to wake people. A man near the fire jokes that coffee is the only thing capable of convincing frozen travellers to leave warm blankets. Nobody disagrees. The kettle becomes the centre of attention. Hands reach toward cups, faces turn toward steam. For a few minutes, everyone simply enjoys being awake and warm. The conversation naturally turns toward the road ahead. Can they continue? Is the trail firm enough? Will the snow make the route easier or harder? Nobody has a perfect answer. That is common on the trail. Plans are necessary. Certainty is rare. Different wagon companies recorded very different experiences after early snowfalls. Some found that a thin layer of snow actually made rough ground easier to cross by covering mud and stones. Others discovered that deeper snow created entirely new obstacles. Conditions mattered more than expectations. The snow itself is neither friend nor enemy. It depends on what comes next. You walk toward the edge of camp and look back. The place that felt so small during the night now appears larger in daylight. You can see the careful arrangement of wagons, the paths people created, the places where fires burned, and the areas where animals rested. The temporary settlement leaves evidence everywhere. Footprints, ash, straw, small pieces of wood, signs of human presence. Yet the prairie has already begun reclaiming it. Snow covers the edges, wind softens the marks. By tomorrow, much of this campsite will look almost untouched. A traveller beside you notices the same thing. Strange, he says. What is? How quickly the land forgets we were here. The thought stays with you. The wagon train has crossed enormous distances, carrying hopes, fears, and entire lives. Yet the landscape remains patient. It allows people to pass through. Then it slowly erases their footprints, not their stories. Those travel differently. A curious habit among some travellers was collecting small reminders from memorable campsites, such as unusual stones, pieces of wood, or other harmless tokens. These objects became personal markers of places that mattered during the journey. A tiny object could hold the memory of an entire difficult week. You imagine someone years later holding a small stone and remembering this snowy morning. The cold, the wagons, the first snowfall, the feeling of continuing despite uncertainty. The wagon master eventually gives the signal that preparation should begin. The camp responds immediately. Blankets are folded, cooking supplies are packed, harnesses are lifted, children are gathered. The peaceful morning slowly becomes another working day. You take one final look at the campsite before leaving it behind. The snow sparkles beneath the rising sun for a moment. Everything appears calm, beautiful, almost easy. Then you notice the stiff wheels, the frozen straps, the tired faces, the work waiting ahead. Beauty and difficulty stand together here. They always have. Soon the wagons will begin moving again, carrying everyone westward toward another stretch of trail. But before the first wheel turns, you pause and remember the night behind you. The crowded blankets, the fading fire, the quiet songs, the watchmen walking through the snow, the sounds that slowly became familiar. The first snowfall was not only a weather event, it was a lesson. A reminder that survival on the trail depended not on avoiding hardship, but on learning how to live within it. The first wheel turns with the sound that feels almost too ordinary for such a difficult morning. A simple creak, a little movement, a reminder that the journey continues. After all the effort of the night, after the cold and the snow and the careful work of preparing everything again, the wagon train does not receive a dramatic farewell from the landscape. The prairie does not announce that you survived. It simply waits for you to move forward. You stand beside the wagon as the oxen lean into their harnesses. Their breath rises in thick white clouds. Muscles tighten beneath heavy winter coats. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the wagon shifts. The wheels begin rolling slowly, carefully. The wooden frame complains as it carries its familiar load once more. Behind you, the campsite remains quiet. A few traces of last night's life are still visible. The ashes of fires, flattened patches of snow where people slept, footprints leading between wagons, the remains of a temporary home that existed for only one night. Then the wind begins its work. Fresh snow drifts over the edges of the camp. Small marks disappear first. A footprint becomes a shallow impression. A path becomes a smooth patch of white. Soon the place where dozens of people ate, talked, worried, and rested begins looking like any other section of prairie. The land remembers differently than people do. People carry memories forward. The earth slowly covers them. You look back one final time. The sight feels strangely emotional, not because the campsite was comfortable. It was not. Not because the night was easy. It was far from easy. But because something happened there. A group of strangers faced the same cold sky, shared the same limited warmth, and woke up ready to continue. That matters. The wagons move in a long line across the snowy ground. The pace is slower than yesterday. Everyone watches the trail carefully. Snow can hide holes, stones, an uneven ground. A path that looked familiar before the storm now appears transformed. The world has been rewritten overnight. Experienced travellers knew that winter weather could completely change the character of a trail. Landmarks disappeared. Familiar routes became harder to identify. Streams that were easy to cross in warmer weather could become dangerous obstacles once ice formed. The landscape demanded attention. You cannot simply follow yesterday's assumptions. You must observe, adjust, continue. A child riding in one wagon presses a hand against the canvas, watching snow-covered grass slide past outside. The journey still appears magical from that perspective. Perhaps children are better at finding wonder. Adults see the work. Children see the adventure. Both views contain some truth. The wagon train moves steadily onward. No one knows exactly what the next days will bring. More snow. Clear skies, better roads, harder conditions. The future remains hidden beyond the horizon. That uncertainty has followed the company since the first wheel began turning months earlier. Yet uncertainty has not stopped anyone. The people around you have learned something important. Confidence does not come from knowing everything will be easy. It comes from knowing you can respond when things become difficult. A wagon wheel breaks. You repair it. A storm arrives. You find shelter. A traveller becomes sick. You help. Supplies run low. You adapt. The journey is built from these responses, not from perfect planning, not from endless good fortune, from persistence. As the wagons continue west, the conversation gradually returns. Someone discusses breakfast. Someone jokes about the frozen buckets. Someone complains that the snow has made every task twice as slow. The complaints are familiar, almost comforting. People have a habit of returning to ordinary conversation after extraordinary moments. That may be one of humanity's greatest skills. You survived a difficult night. Then you worry about lunch. That seems very human. One traveller carries a small piece of the campsite with him, without even realizing it. A bit of ash has settled onto his coat from the evening fire. Another person has a snow-covered branch tucked beside the wagon, collected for fuel later. A child still carries the same rag doll that watched over the entire night. The journey continues carrying pieces of the past. Not everything is left behind. Among families who travelled west, objects often became powerful reminders of specific moments along the way. A worn blanket, a repaired tool, or a simple keepsake could later recall entire chapters of the journey. The value of an object was not only what it could do, but what it represented. You understand that now. A blanket is not just warmth, it is the person who shared it. A fire is not just heat, it is the voices gathered around it. A wagon is not just wood and iron, it is a moving home. The snow begins falling again, not heavily, just a few quiet flakes. Everyone notices, after the previous night. Even a small snowfall receives attention. Faces turn upward. People check the sky. The wagon master studies the horizon. Then the company keeps moving. The first snowfall has changed nothing and everything at the same time. The destination remains, the road remains. The difficulties remain, but the travellers are different. They know more now. They know how cold a night can become. They know how much warmth can come from a shared song. They know how important a dry blanket feels. They know that even a crowded wagon can become a place of comfort. They know that morning always arrives. The wagons continue across the white landscape, leaving fresh tracks behind them. For a while, the marks are clear, then the snow begins covering them. Soon they will disappear too. But the story remains. The night inside the 1847 wagon train during the first snowfall was not remembered because it was easy. It was remembered because ordinary people found extraordinary patience in an ordinary struggle. They slept where they could. They warmed themselves however possible. They shared what they had. They woke up. They continued. And somewhere beneath the endless western sky, another day of the journey begins. The snow continues falling softly behind you as the wagon train moves farther into the quiet distance. The sounds of the camp become smaller now, blending into the open prairie until they are almost impossible to separate from the wind itself. The creak of wheels, the slow steps of animals, the gentle movement of canvas, all of it fades. You no longer feel the sharp cold of the night. You remember the warmth that existed within it, the firelight, the shared meals, the quiet voices, the blankets pulled close, the simple kindness that made an uncomfortable place feel almost like home. The prairie stretches endlessly around you. But there is no need to hurry. The journey moves at its own pace. One step, one wheel turn, one quiet breath at a time. You imagine the wagons continuing beneath the stars, carrying families, hopes, memories, and dreams toward a future they cannot yet see. The snow settles, the wind softens, the horizon becomes calm, and for a little while you can simply rest. The long road is still ahead. But tonight's story is complete. You have shared the fire, you've heard the voices, you've crossed the frozen darkness. Now let the quiet return. Let the images fade gently. The covered wagons grow smaller. The prairie grows softer. The snowfall becomes a peaceful curtain of white. And somewhere in that distant winter landscape, the travellers continue onward, while you drift into a calm and restful sleep. Sweet dreams!